Hey everyone, hope you're doing great. Welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we'll dive into what if Deku survived Hulk's gamma radiation and transformed? Smash that subscribe button, and be sure to peek at the description below. Let's begin. The air in the Kamino Ward industrial complex had the metallic tang of rust and decay. It was a graveyard of ambition, where skeletons of forgotten factories clawed at a perpetually overcast sky. Pipes, stained orange and brown with years of neglect, snaked across the ground like dead iron serpents. Wind whistled a low, mournful tune through the shattered panes of warehouse windows, carrying with it the faint, chemical scent of industrial ghosts. It was the perfect place for heroes to be born from ruin, or so the lesson plan dictated. And remember, the primary objective is civilian safety. The voice of Shota Aizawa crackled through their earpieces, as sharp and frayed as a worn-out capture weapon. Subduing the villains is secondary. This is a rescue and combat scenario. Prioritize. Izuku Midoriya, crouched behind a mountain of corroded shipping containers, adjusted his earpiece and nodded, though his teacher couldn't see him. His gloved fingers tightened on the worn cover of his notebook, a nervous habit he hadn't quite managed to shake. Even in his upgraded gamma costume, with its iron-soled boots and reinforced arm bracers, he was still the same analytical mind, cataloging every detail. The joint training exercise with Shiketsu High School was in full swing. The scenario: a rogue science collective had taken over the complex, holding a group of civilian trainees hostage while threatening to detonate a volatile chemical agent. The students were split into teams, a mix of UA and Shiketsu talent, tasked with infiltrating, securing the hostages, and neutralizing the threat. Deku's team consisted of his most trusted friends, Ochako Uraraka and Tenya Ida, along with the stoic and formidable Inase Yorashi from Shiketsu. Their objective was the central processing plant, where the bomb, a prop with an intimidatingly loud timer, was located. Midoriya, your analysis? Ida's voice was a crisp, professional whisper beside him. Even in a simulation, the class president was the picture of decorum, his silver armor gleaming in the dim light. Deku scanned the area, his green eyes darting from shadow to shadow. One for all hummed beneath his skin, a familiar, low-level thrum of power he kept capped at a safe 8%. There are 2 sentries on the catwalks, likely with long-range quirks. Yorashi, your wind could provide excellent cover and disruption. Uraraka, you and I can use that cover for a high-speed aerial approach to the main entrance. Ida, you'll be our ground support, ready to blitz anyone who gets past us and secure the evac route for the hostages. A bold and decisive strategy! Yorashi boomed, his voice a barely contained whirlwind of passion. He slapped his hands together, generating a small gust that rustled their hair. I will unleash a gale of justice! Uraraka gave Deku a thumbs up, her smile a bright spot in the oppressive gloom. Ready when you are, Deku! The plan was solid. It was textbook. But a knot of anxiety, a familiar companion, tightened in Deku's stomach. Joint exercises always added a layer of unpredictability. The presence of other schools, the need to impress and coordinate with unfamiliar faces. It was a different kind of pressure. He glanced across the sprawling complex to where another team was advancing on a different target. He could just make out a flicker of orange, Bakugo. Of course, Katsuki was on the front lines, his explosions echoing like furious punctuation marks in the manufactured chaos. He was probably furious he wasn't on the primary assault team. Team Alpha, execute! Aizawa's voice commanded, cutting through his thoughts. Let's go! Ida declared. Instantly, the world became a symphony of controlled chaos. Yorashi thrust his arms forward, and a powerful, swirling vortex of wind erupted, kicking up dust and debris into a blinding screen. Under its cover, Uraraka tapped Deku's shoulder, then her own. The familiar, weightless sensation enveloped him. Full cowling, 15%, red veins of energy traced across his limbs. He pushed off the ground, Uraraka controlling their ascent with practiced ease. They soared over the battlefield, a silent, 2-person strike team. Below, Ida's engines roared to life, a blur of blue flame as he burst from cover to engage the ground-level villains. It was working. It was all going according to plan. They landed softly on the roof of the processing plant. Deku immediately dropped into a crouch, scanning for threats, while Uraraka released her quirk. The weight of the world slammed back into him, a familiar and grounding sensation. That was when the first thing went wrong. The power across the entire district died. Not just the flickering lights of the complex, but everything. The distant hum of the city's power grid vanished, plunging them into an unnerving, profound silence. The timer on the prop bomb went dead. Aizawa's voice in his earpiece was replaced by a burst of static. "What was that?" Uraraka whispered, her voice tight with confusion. Before Deku could answer, a new sound filled the void. It was a low, resonant hum, a vibration that seemed to seep up from the concrete beneath their feet and into their bones. And with it came a light. From the central courtyard of the industrial complex, an area that had been designated as a neutral zone, a sickly green light began to pulse, casting long, distorted shadows that danced like wraiths. "All teams, fall back!" "Repeat, all teams, fall back to the perimeter! This is not a drill!" A new voice, raw with panic, crackled through the comms. It was Vlad King. "We have an unsanctioned hostile on site. Threat level unknown." The exercise was over. A real villain had arrived. Deku's blood ran cold. He and Uraraka scrambled to the edge of the roof, peering down into the courtyard. What they saw defied comprehension. In the center of the yard stood a man. He was tall and gaunt, with a severe face framed by graying hair. He wore a pristine white lab coat that seemed almost luminous in the eerie green glow, a stark contrast to the grime of his surroundings. He looked less like a villain and more like a disgruntled university professor. But behind him was the source of the light, a machine. It was a tripod of gleaming, chrome-like metal, converging on a central gyroscope that held a pulsating, fist-sized sphere of what looked like green, liquid energy. Wires and conduits snaked from it, burrowing into the ground as if it were a parasitic organism feeding on the earth itself. The air around it shimmered with heat and a strange, invisible pressure. "Behold the future!" The man's voice boomed, amplified by some unseen technology. It echoed off the decaying factory walls, filled with a chilling, academic arrogance. "For generations, we have been slaves to the genetic lottery you call quirks, a chaotic, unpredictable, and ultimately flawed system that bestows godlike power upon the foolish and leaves the brilliant with nothing." Several pro-heroes were already moving in. Aizawa had dropped from a high gantry, his capture weapon lashing out. Ectoplasm's clones swarmed from the alleys, but they were met by a handful of henchmen in advanced-looking body armor, armed with weapons that fired blasts of concussive force. "Quirks are a disease," the man in the lab coat continued, paying the skirmish no mind. He gestured grandly at his machine. "But I have found the cure, a power source that is pure, absolute, and with the right application, perfectly controllable. No more random chance. Only a deliberate, engineered ascension. I give you Gamma, Dr. Eris Thorne." Deku's mind, a frantic library of hero and villain data, supplied the name. A disgraced quirk geneticist, ostracized for his radical and unethical theories on quirk eradication and replacement. He'd vanished years ago. "He's insane!" Uraraka breathed, her knuckles white where she gripped the ledge. "He's a threat," Deku corrected, his mind already racing. "The device is the key. It's powering his henchman's gear and emitting that energy. It has to be the target." Down below, the fight was escalating. Aizawa managed to erase the quirk of one of Thorne's guards, only for the man to rely on his powered suit, forcing the hero back. It was clear Thorne had come prepared. The students, following orders, were herding the civilian trainees towards the designated exit point. The young girl, Akari, who had been so brave during the initial exercise, was now crying, clutching her mother's hand. Suddenly, a massive blast of hot wind ripped through the courtyard. Inasa Yorashi had entered the fray, creating a powerful cyclone to scatter the henchmen. "Such a pointless, chaotic display of power!" Thorne sneered, his eyes wild with fervor. He tapped a control panel on his wrist. The hum of the gamma emitter intensified, and the green light pulsed violently. "You heroes don't understand. You are clinging to an outdated model of evolution. Let me show you the path forward." A high-pitched whine began to emanate from the machine, growing in frequency until it was a physical pain in their ears. The metal of the tripod began to glow red-hot, and cracks of green energy, like lightning, started arcing between its legs. "Sir!" The core is destabilizing, one of his henchmen yelled over the din. The power draw is too high. Thorn's arrogant expression faltered for a fraction of a second, replaced by a flicker of genuine panic. No, not yet. It's too soon. The calibration isn't complete. He had lost control. Aizawa, seeing the imminent danger, screamed into the comms. The device is going to blow. Everyone, take cover. Evacuate now. The orderly retreat devolved into a frantic scramble. Heroes and students alike abandoned the fight, focusing on getting everyone clear. The group of civilian trainees caught in the open between the courtyard and the exit were the most vulnerable. They were frozen in fear, caught in the crossfire of the heroes' retreat and the henchmen's covering fire. Deku watched in horror as a stray concussive blast from a henchman struck a nearby stack of steel girders. The massive structure groaned, tilted, and then began to fall, its shadow sweeping over the panicked trainees, threatening to cut off their only escape route. There was no time. No time to think, no time to plan. His body moved on its own. Full cowling, 20%. The power of one for all surged through him, a familiar inferno of strength. He launched himself off the roof, a green and black blur against the sickly glow of the failing machine. He landed on the ground with a crack of displaced concrete, his mind a razor-sharp calculator of angles and velocities. He saw it all in a fractured, hyper-aware state. Ida, using his recipro burst to ferry 2 trainees to safety but too far to help the rest. Yorashi, his winds occupied with holding back Thorn's men. Uraraka, desperately trying to make her way to the group but blocked by the fighting. The falling girders. The crying child, Akari, who had tripped and fallen. Her mother, screaming her name, trying to go back for her. And the gamma emitter, now whining like a dying star, its green light so bright it bleached the world of all other color. A countdown clock in his head told him there were maybe 10 seconds left. He reached the trainees in a heartbeat. Get behind the concrete wall! Now! He roared, his voice filled with a desperate authority he rarely used. He grabbed the 2 men by the collars of their jumpsuits, practically throwing them towards the thick, 10-foot-high retaining wall that marked the edge of the complex. He turned back. The mother had reached her daughter, scooping the terrified child into her arms. They were too slow. The light from the emitter was blinding. 5 seconds. Deku didn't hesitate. He wasn't a boy with a borrowed power anymore. He was a hero. Delaware smash! He didn't flick his finger to attack. He angled his hand downwards and unleashed the blast of air pressure against the ground behind him, a controlled explosion that propelled him forward like a cannonball. He slammed into the mother and child, his arms wrapping around them in a protective cocoon. He used their combined momentum to carry them the final few feet, shoving them with every ounce of his strength behind the relative safety of the concrete wall. He heard the mother's grateful sob, felt the small child's hands clutch at his costume. He had done it. They were safe. A profound sense of relief washed over him, warm and immediate. And then it was gone, replaced by the chilling realization of his own position. He was on the wrong side of the wall. He turned, his body aching from the strain of the repeated power-ups. He was standing alone in the courtyard, at ground zero. The gamma emitter was no longer a machine. It was a miniature, furious sun of pure, toxic green energy. The air crackled, tasting of ozone and something else, something alien. The sound cut out, replaced by an all-consuming pressure. In that final, silent moment, Izuku Midoriya's life didn't flash before his eyes. Instead, he saw the faces of those he had fought so hard to protect. His mother, her tearful smile filled with pride. All Might, his gaunt face beaming, his finger pointed towards him. You too can become a hero. Uraraka, Ida, Todoroki, Bakugo, his friends. His family. I'm sorry. Then, the world turned white. And then green. From behind the wall, the detonation was a silent, world-shattering event. A flash of incandescent green light shot into the sky, so impossibly bright that it burned after images onto their retinas even with their eyes squeezed shut. The ground heaved, a violent, rolling earthquake that threw them from their feet. A wave of concussive force, utterly silent, slammed into the concrete wall, which groaned and cracked under the strain but mercifully held. It was followed by a wave of heat that felt like opening a blast furnace, stealing the air from their lungs. And then came the sound. It was not an explosion. It was a roar. A sound so deep and primal it felt like the planet itself was being torn asunder. It ripped through the air, shattering every remaining window in the complex and shaking the very foundations of their bones. When the light faded and the roar subsided, a deafening silence fell. The only sound was the ringing in Ochako Uraraka's ears. She pushed herself up, her body trembling uncontrollably. "Deku?" she whispered, her voice a dry rasp. She peered over the top of the cracked wall. The sight that met her eyes would be seared into her memory for the rest of her life. The courtyard was gone. In its place was a massive, glassy crater, still smoking with faint green vapor. The gamma emitter, Dr. Thorne, and his henchmen had been completely vaporized. The surrounding buildings were mangled husks of twisted metal and scorched concrete. The destruction was absolute. And in the very center of the crater, lying in a shallow depression, was a small, still figure. "DKU!" Her scream was raw, torn from the depths of her soul. She scrambled over the wall, heedless of the sharp, broken concrete, Ida right behind her, his face a mask of rigid, disciplined horror. They half ran, half slid down into the crater. The smell was awful, like burned plastic and irradiated metal. The air was thick and heavy. As they got closer, the horrifying details became clear. Izuku Midoriya's hero costume, his pride and joy, was shredded and burned away, fused to his skin in blackened patches. His body was covered in strange, vein-like burns that glowed with a faint, residual green light. His limbs were bent at unnatural angles. He was utterly, terrifyingly still. There was no rise and fall of his chest. No, 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 no! Uraraka fell to her knees beside him, tears streaming down her face, her hands hovering over him, afraid to touch, afraid to confirm what her heart already knew. Ida stood frozen, his methodical mind unable to process the illogical, unacceptable scene before him. A blur of orange and black landed at the edge of the crater with a thunderous impact. Katsuki Bakugo stood there, his eyes wide, his usual sneer completely absent. He stared at the motionless form of his childhood rival, his hands clenched into white-knuckled fists at his sides. For the first time in a very long time, he was speechless. He saw not the annoying, pebble in his shoe Deku, but Izuku. The boy who had always been there, always chasing, always present. A shadow fell over them all. All Might, in his towering muscle form, had arrived. He had seen the green dome of energy from miles away, a sickeningly familiar signature from a stolen technology file he'd reviewed just weeks ago. He had known. He landed softly, the ground barely trembling, but the look on his face was one of utter devastation. The famous, indomitable smile was gone, replaced by the gaping abyss of a mentor's worst failure. "Young Midoriya!" His voice was a choked whisper, thick with a grief that seemed to physically shrink him. He took a heavy step forward, his gaze fixed on the broken body of his successor, his legacy, his son in all but blood. Recovery Girl was already there, her ambulance having screamed onto the scene moments after the blast. She rushed forward with a portable scanner, her aged face grim and professional, but her eyes betraying a deep sadness. "His vitals are non-existent," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "Massive cellular decay, radiation poisoning on a scale I've never." "He's gone!" Uraraka let out a sob that was pure agony. Ida finally broke, a single, perfect tear tracing a path through the grime on his cheek. All Might sank to one knee, his massive frame trembling, his head bowed in defeat. The symbol of peace was broken. It was in that moment of absolute despair, as the world held its breath, that the impossible happened. A single finger on Izuku's right hand twitched. It was a small, violent spasm, a jolt of errant electricity. Everyone froze. Recovery Girl stared at her scanner, her eyes wide with disbelief. "What?" A low, guttural groan escaped Izuku's lips. It wasn't a sound of pain. It was deeper, more resonant, like the growl of a cornered beast. The glowing green burns on his skin began to pulse, slowly at first, then with increasing speed, like a dying ember being coaxed back to life. A faint green steam began to rise from his body. All Might looked up, a flicker of insane hope warring with utter terror in his eyes. "Young Midoriya!" Izuku's head lolled to the side. And then, his eyes snapped open. They were not the vibrant, hopeful emerald of Izuku Midoriya. They were not the eyes of a hero. They were two blazing pools of pure, toxic, radioactive green. They burned with an alien light, an unholy energy that consumed pupil and scare alike. It was the color of poison. The color of contamination. The color of a monster waking from a long, deep sleep. And from the crater, a new sound began to rise, the sickening, wet crunch of bones snapping, reforming, and growing. The silence in the crater was a fragile, crystalline thing, made all the more profound by the preceding cataclysm. It was the silence of a world holding its breath, waiting for the other shoe to drop. For the heroes and students gathered at the precipice of the devastation, that silence was shattered not by a sound, but by a sight, two burning, malevolent green orbs where Izuku Midoriya's kind eyes should have been. A collective gasp, sharp and stolen, was the only response. Uraraka, still on her knees, felt the tears on her face turn to ice. That wasn't Deku. It couldn't be. It was a changeling, a demon wearing his face. The first sound was a wet, sickening pop, followed by a crunch that echoed with unnatural clarity in the still air. Izuku's back arched violently, lifting his torso from the glassy ground. It was an impossible, horrifying angle, the arch of a body broken on a wheel. His mouth opened, but the sound that escaped was not a human scream. It was a low, guttural, agonizing groan, the sound of sinew tearing and bone grinding against bone. What is happening to him? Ida stammered, his disciplined mind short-circuiting as it tried to reconcile the laws of biology with the blasphemy unfolding before him. The transformation began in earnest. It was not a majestic surge of power. It was a violent biological insurrection. His skeleton was the first battleground. A chorus of sharp cracks erupted from his frame as his bones, irradiated and supercharged by a fusion of gamma energy, and one for all, began to lengthen and thicken. His limbs stretched, his torso expanded, the sound like a forest of trees being snapped in a hurricane. He rose to his knees, his head thrown back, a scream tearing from his throat. This scream was different. It was pure, unadulterated agony, a sound so raw and filled with suffering that several of the younger students clapped their hands over their ears, their faces pale. Green steam, thick and acrid, began to pour from his skin as his body temperature skyrocketed. His flesh rippled and bulged, muscles swelling at a rate that defied nature. The shredded remnants of his hero costume, fused to his skin, were torn asunder as his frame grew relentlessly. The skin itself began to change. The angry, glowing burns spread like a virus, their toxic green color bleeding into the surrounding flesh until his entire body was suffused with a deep, olive-green hue, crisscrossed with darker, vein-like patterns that pulsed with a faint inner light. His boyish features hardened and broadened, his jaw thickening, his brow growing heavy and pronounced. His hair, once a soft, unruly mop of dark green, seemed to grow wilder, taking on the darker, fiercer shade of a forest at midnight. And then there was the lightning. The familiar green and white crackle of one for all erupted from his body, no longer the controlled, elegant tracery of full cowling. This was a chaotic, furious storm of raw power, a constant, crackling aura of untamed energy that tore at the air around him, kicking up dust and superheating the ground beneath his feet. In less than a minute, the transformation was complete. Where the broken body of Izuku Midoriya had lain, a giant now stood. He was immense, easily 8 feet tall, a hulking behemoth of corded, impossibly dense muscle. He was a living statue carved from jade and rage, a physical incarnation of overwhelming power. This was not Deku. This was something else. Something primal. This was Aegis. The creature, for it no longer felt right to call it he, drew in a breath, its chest expanding like a blacksmith's bellows. It then let out a roar. It was a sound that dwarfed the explosion that had birthed it. It was a declaration of existence, a challenge to the heavens, a sound of pure, untamed power that shook the very souls of those who heard it. It was the roar of a hurricane and an earthquake combined, a physical force that sent waves of pressure radiating outwards, cracking the crater floor even further. For a long moment, Aegis simply stood there, its head turning slowly, those blazing green eyes scanning the wreckage. There was no sign of Izuku's analytical mind, no flicker of his gentle spirit. There was only a blank, feral intensity. Its gaze swept over the terrified faces of the heroes, the students, his friends. There was no recognition. They were just part of the scenery. Then, its eyes locked onto movement. On the far side of the crater, 3 of Dr. Thorne's henchmen, who had been far enough away to survive the initial blast, were crawling from behind a melted slab of machinery. Their advanced armor was scorched and dented, but they were alive. One of them was frantically tapping at a data pad, his face illuminated by its glow. "The data is corrupted, but the core readings are off the charts," he hissed to his companions. "Forget the doctor. We salvage the emitter's core data and we can sell this technology for billions. Just grab it and let's go," another urged, clutching an injured arm. Their greed was their undoing. To the primal consciousness of Aegis, they were not scavengers. They were a threat. A lingering impurity in its newly claimed territory. Its entire being was now governed by a single, overwhelming, biological imperative that had been burned into its DNA by the gamma radiation and amplified 1,000-fold by One for All, protect. And everything that wasn't designated as safe was, by default, a threat. Aegis's head snapped towards the henchman. Its expression, which had been blank, now twisted into a mask of savage fury. A low growl rumbled in its chest, a sound like grinding tectonic plates. It moved. It didn't run. It erupted. With a single, explosive push, it crossed the 100-meter-wide crater in less than a second. The ground shattered under the force of its departure. It was not the graceful, controlled leap of Deku using full cowling. It was the launch of a missile, a trajectory of pure, brutal force. The henchmen stared, their faces draining of all color. They had time for a single, collective gasp of terror before the green behemoth was upon them. The first one raised his weapon, a concussive energy rifle. He fired a blast potent enough to punch through a reinforced concrete wall. The blast hit Aegis square in the chest. It didn't even slow it down. The energy dissipated against its glowing green skin with a faint hiss, like water on a hot skillet. Aegis didn't even seem to notice. Its first attack was a simple backhand. It was a casual, dismissive gesture, but it carried the force of a freight train. The impact connected with the rifleman, and the advanced battle armor crumpled like aluminum foil. The man was sent flying, tumbling through the air for 200 yards before crashing into the skeletal remains of a factory wall, which promptly collapsed on top of him. The second henchman screamed and tried to activate a personal energy shield. A shimmering blue bubble flickered to life around him. Aegis slammed its fists down on the shield in a double-axe handle blow. The sound was not a crack, but a deafening boom that shattered the air itself. The shield didn't just break, it imploded, the resulting shockwave blasting the henchman into the ground, leaving him embedded in a shallow, man-shaped crater. The third, the one with the datapad, simply froze, paralyzed by a terror so absolute it shut down his nervous system. Aegis stopped before him, its massive form eclipsing the sky. It leaned down, its face inches from the man's. The heat rolling off its body was intense, the crackle of its OFA aura deafening. The man could see his own terrified reflection in those bottomless green eyes. He saw no mercy. No humanity. Only a force of nature about to correct an imbalance. Aegis raised a hand, its fingers curling into a fist the size of a small boulder. "Stop!" The voice was a strangled cry from the edge of the crater. Uraraka. She stood there, trembling, one hand outstretched, her face a mess of tears and horror. "Deku, please stop!" For a fraction of a second, the name seemed to register. Aegis's head tilted, its fist hovering. A flicker of something, confusion? Memory, crossed its features. The moment was shattered by a new challenger. "Get the hell away from him, you damn monster!" A streak of orange and black shot into the sky. Katsuki Bakugo, propelled by a series of powerful explosions, flew towards Aegis like a human cannonball. His expression was a mixture of his trademark fury, but underneath it was something else, a deep, profound shock. This thing, this monster, had been born from the useless, quirkless Deku he tormented for years. The power it wielded was an insult to everything he had ever worked for. It was an aberration that had to be destroyed. AP shot! Autocannon! Focusing his explosions into armor-piercing projectiles, Bakugo unleashed a sustained barrage against Aegis's back. The blast struck home with percussive force, creating a series of small, bright flashes against the green skin. Anyone else, even All Might in his prime, would have been staggered by the attack. Aegis barely flinched. It slowly turned its head, its glowing eyes fixing on the airborne Bakugo. Its expression was one of mild annoyance, like a person being buzzed by a fly. With a speed that defied its massive size, its arm shot out and swatted Bakugo out of the air. The impact was brutal and dismissive. Bakugo was sent spiraling, his flight path cut short as he crashed heavily into the side of the crater, tumbling down the incline in a cloud of dust and debris, his gauntlets sparking uselessly. He lay there, groaning, the wind knocked out of him, his pride shattered more thoroughly than any bone. He had just thrown one of his strongest attacks at this thing, and it had swatted him away. It hadn't even considered him a threat. Shoto Todoroki stood at the edge of the crater, a massive wall of ice already forming at his feet, ready to be unleashed. But he hesitated. His analytical mind, usually so quick to assess a situation, was struggling to quantify the sheer scale of the power before him. The raw, untamed energy coming off the creature was beyond anything he had ever felt. It dwarfed his father's flames. It dwarfed the All Might he'd seen at Kamino. This wasn't just a new quirk. It was a fundamental force, a walking natural disaster. Using his ice against it felt like trying to freeze the sun. With Bakugo neutralized, Aegis turned its attention back to the last henchman, its brief distraction forgotten. The primal mission reasserted itself. Threat. Eliminate. Its fist began to descend. The henchman squeezed his eyes shut, bracing for a death that would be instantaneous and absolute. But the blow never landed. A massive hand, larger than any normal man's, clamped around Aegis's wrist, stopping its descent cold. The air crackled as the creature's OFA lightning met a familiar, powerful aura. All Might stood between Aegis and the henchman. He had powered up to his muscle form, his presence a beacon of stability in the chaos. But even at his full height, he only came up to Aegis's chest. The symbol of peace, for the first time in his public life, looked small. That's enough, my boy. All Might's voice was deep and steady, but laced with an undercurrent of desperate pleading. Aegis's head snapped towards him. A new roar ripped from its throat, this one frustrated and challenging. It tried to yank its arm free, but All Might's grip was iron. The ground beneath their feet fractured as they strained against each other, a silent, titanic struggle of wills. Aegis was stronger, impossibly, terrifyingly stronger, but All Might had decades of experience, and a resolve forged in countless battles. Aegis raised its other fist to bring it down on All Might's head. This was the moment everyone feared. The monster, born from a hero, was about to strike down the symbol of peace, but it stopped. Its fist hovered inches from All Might's face. Its roaring subsided into a low, confused growl. It stared at the man holding its arm, and for the first time, a flicker of genuine recognition sparked in the toxic green inferno of its eyes. It knew him. This presence, this power, it was familiar. It was ancient. It was a part of itself. Deep within the raging storm of gamma energy and raw instinct, the vestiges of One for All were stirring. They recognized their eighth holder. They recognized their source. The primal mind of Aegis couldn't comprehend who All Might was, but it understood, on a fundamental level, that this man was not a threat. He was kin. All Might saw the hesitation. He saw the flicker of confusion in those monstrous eyes. This was his chance. He knew that fighting this thing would be a catastrophe. Even if he could win, which he sincerely doubted, it would mean fighting young Midoriya. It was an unthinkable outcome. So he did the one thing no one else would have dared. He let go of Aegis's wrist. He stood before the creature, disarmed and vulnerable, his famous smile nowhere to be seen. His expression was one of immense sadness and paternal love. "Listen to me, Midoriya," he said, his voice soft but carrying. He didn't shout. He spoke as a teacher, a mentor. "It's over. You did it," Aegis growled, confused by the lack of aggression. It took a half-step back, its huge body tensing. "The villain is gone," All Might continued, taking a slow, deliberate step forward. "The danger has passed. Look," he gestured with an open hand towards the crying mother and child, Akari, who were being shielded by Aizawa at the edge of the crater. "They are safe." The other students, your friends, they are safe. Aegis's gaze followed his gesture. It looked at the small group of civilians. It saw Uraraka, her face streaked with tears but her hands no longer outstretched in a plea. It saw Ida, standing protectively in front of a group of trainees. It saw the last henchman, who was now scrambling away, forgotten. The primal brain processed the new information. Threats eliminated. Protected subjects secure. Danger nullified. The stimulus that had fueled its rage, the overwhelming, desperate need to protect, was fading. Its core directive had been fulfilled. And with its purpose gone, the form itself had no reason to exist. All Might saw the change immediately. The furious storm of OFA lightning began to calm, the chaotic crackles slowing to a gentle hum. The intense, burning light in Aegis's eyes began to dim. You saved them, my boy, All Might said, his voice thick with emotion. You were a true hero. Now, come back. Come back to us, Izuku. The name, spoken with such heartfelt sincerity, was the final key. A tremor ran through the creature's massive frame. It looked down at its own giant, green hands as if seeing them for the first time. A look of profound confusion and horror washed over its face. A low groan escaped its lips, but this time, it was laced with a familiar, human pain. The reversion was as violent as the transformation. Aegis roared, but the sound was choked, strangled. It fell to its knees, clutching its head. The green steam began to pour from its body again, this time in thick, billowing clouds. The sickening sound of snapping bones returned, but in reverse, as its skeleton contracted. Its muscles deflated, writhing and spasming under the skin as they were violently broken down. It was a horrifying, agonizing process. The creature screamed, its voice shifting in pitch, the monstrous roar slowly morphing back into the desperate cries of a teenage boy. The deep green of its skin began to recede, paling back to its natural tone, leaving behind the raw, glowing burns from the initial blast. All Might rushed forward, catching the shrinking form as it collapsed. The body continued to contort in his arms, the process excruciatingly slow, until finally it was over. Lying unconscious in All Might's arms, cradled like a child, was Izuku Midoriya. He was naked, his body covered in sweat, steam, and the angry green burns. He was pale and frighteningly still, save for the shallow, ragged breaths that escaped his lips. He was just a boy again. A boy who had been put through a biological meat grinder and come out the other side. The crater fell silent once more. But this was a different silence. It was the heavy, breathless silence of shock, of questions with no answers, and of a fear that was just beginning to dawn. Uraraka and Ida rushed forward, stopping a few feet away, their eyes wide with a mixture of relief and terror. Bakugo pushed himself to his feet, clutching his ribs, his face unreadable as he stared at the scene. He had just witnessed the pathetic, quirkless Deku transform into a god of destruction and then collapse back into a fragile boy. The foundations of his world had been cracked wide open. All Might looked down at the face of his successor, so peaceful in unconsciousness, and felt a cold dread snake around his heart. He had his boy back, but he knew, with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, that the monster was not gone. It was just sleeping. Sleeping inside the kindest, most heroic soul he had ever known, and he had no idea how to save him from it. Darkness. And the sound. A roar that vibrated in his bones, a sound of fury and broken things that was both terrifyingly alien and intimately his own. Green lightning, a furious, uncontrolled storm. The impact of a fist against something that crumbles like paper. The distant, panicked cries of his friends. A face, gaunt and familiar, filled with a desperate sadness. A name, spoken like a prayer, Izuku. Agony. Not of injury, but of change. The feeling of bones grinding, stretching, snapping back into place. Muscles tearing and knitting themselves together in the same instant, a body at war with itself. A primal, overwhelming instinct screaming a single, deafening command, protect, and then, a slow, agonizing collapse. Power draining away like a life tide, leaving behind an aching, hollow void and the crushing weight of a consciousness he didn't recognize. A single, steady beat pierced the chaotic symphony of memory. It was rhythmic, insistent, and blessedly real. It was an anchor in the storm. Izuku Midoriya's eyelids fluttered. They felt heavy, as if weighted down with lead. He tried to take a breath and found his lungs filled easily, deeply. The air was cool and sterile, tinged with the scent of antiseptic and clean linens. He recognized it instantly. He'd spent enough time in Recovery Girl's care to know the smell of UA's medical wing. He forced his eyes open. The world swam into focus, a serene, sterile white. The ceiling was acoustic tile. The light was soft, diffused. The steady beeping came from a multifunction monitor beside his bed, its screen displaying a set of vital signs so strong and steady they looked like a textbook diagram. And 4-line was taped to the back of his hand, but the bag hanging from the stand was just a saline drip. He was in a bed. He was alive. He sat up, the movement surprisingly easy, fluid. There was no pain. A deep, phantom ache resonated in his bones, a memory of trauma rather than an actual injury. But that was all. He looked down at his body, expecting to see a roadmap of bandages, casts, and Recovery Girl's kisses. There was nothing. His skin was clear, unblemished. The burns, the broken bones he vaguely remembered, they were gone. More than that, he felt strong. Not just healed, but fundamentally, irrevocably stronger. There was a low, resonant hum of power beneath his skin, a deeper, more potent thrum than One for All had ever produced on its own. It felt like a second heartbeat, a low-frequency bass note playing constantly in the background of his existence. Easy now, dearie. Don't go trying to run a marathon just yet. Recovery Girl's voice was a welcome comfort. She stood by the door, her usual stern expression softened by a profound and visible relief. She walked over, her cane tapping a gentle rhythm on the polished floor, and looked at the readings on his monitor. Remarkable, she murmured, more to herself than to him. Cellular regeneration is off the charts. No signs of radiation poisoning, no tissue damage. It's as if your body just absorbed it all. Recovery Girl. Izuku's voice was hoarse, cracking from disuse. He swallowed, trying to clear his throat. What happened? The villain. Dr. Thorne. Is everyone okay? Uraraka? Ida? The trainees? The questions tumbled out, a frantic cascade of priorities. His own condition was an afterthought. It always was. Recovery Girl gave him a small, sad smile. Everyone is safe, Izuku. Thanks to you. You saved them all. The relief that washed over him was so potent it almost made him dizzy. He sank back against the pillows, a shaky hand coming up to wipe at his eyes. Oh, thank goodness. But the relief was fleeting, chased away by a shadow of confusion. His memory was a patchwork of terrifying, fragmented images. The green light. The searing pain. Shoving the mother and her child to safety. And then, the roar. The immense, hulking body that felt like his own. Bakugo's explosions feeling like pebbles. All Might. The device. He said slowly, trying to piece it together. It exploded. I was at the center of it. He looked at his own unmarred hands. How am I? Before Recovery Girl could answer, the door slid open. Toshinori Yagi entered, looking more gaunt and haunted than Izuku had ever seen him. He wasn't smiling. Close behind him were Aizawa, his face an unreadable mask of stoicism, and Principal Nizu, perched calmly on Aizawa's capture weapon. They were followed by a woman Izuku didn't recognize. She was tall and sharp-featured, with intelligent, analytical eyes behind a pair of wire-rimmed glasses. She wore a lab coat and carried a data pad, her entire demeanor screaming specialist. The atmosphere in the room shifted instantly. The gentle comfort of the infirmary evaporated, replaced by a heavy, clinical gravity. This wasn't a post-mission wellness check. This was a debriefing. Midoriya. Nizu began, his chipper tone failing to conceal the seriousness of the situation. It is good to see you conscious. I trust you are feeling well? Yes, sir. I feel fine. Izuku answered, his confusion mounting. Too fine. That is part of what we need to discuss, Aizawa said, his voice flat and direct. He cut straight to the point, as always. Let's not sugarcoat this. You survived a catastrophic dose of a previously unknown energy source. We need to understand what that has done to you. All Might stepped forward, placing a comforting hand on Izuku's shoulder. The touch was grounding, but the worry in his mentor's eyes did little to soothe the anxiety coiling in Izuku's gut. This is Dr. Kenji Tanaka. All Might introduced the woman. She's one of the country's leading experts in quark theory and radiation biology. She's been analyzing your condition since you were brought back to UA. Dr. Tanaka offered a curt, professional nod. Midoriya-kun. Your case is unprecedented. She tapped her datapad, and a complex holographic image of a DNA double helix appeared in the air beside the bed. It was glowing with a familiar green light. As best as we can determine, she began, her tone crisp and academic. The energy you were exposed to was a highly concentrated form of gamma radiation, but it was altered. Engineered. When the device detonated, it didn't just irradiate you. It initiated a process of forced genetic fusion. She zoomed in on the helix, pointing to where foreign, brightly glowing strands were woven into the original structure. Your DNA, already uniquely altered by the transference of One for All, acted as a bonding agent. The gamma radiation didn't give you a new quirk. It latched onto the immense, untamed power already inside you. It became a part of you, a part of One for All. Izuku stared at the glowing helix, his mind struggling to keep up. A fusion? But what does that mean? It means, Nisa interjected, his small, dark eyes intense, that your body has developed a new, and extraordinarily dangerous, biological failsafe. All Might squeezed his shoulder gently. My boy, when you were exposed, One for All reacted defensively. It flooded your system with power to combat the radiation, an amount that should have torn your body to pieces. But it didn't. The gamma energy, in a symbiotic fusion, acted as a biological stabilizer. It forced your body to change, to become a vessel capable of not just containing that level of power, but thriving on it. The pieces began to click into place, forming a picture that made Izuku's blood run cold. The memories of the transformation, the agony, the growth, were not a nightmare. They were real. That thing, he whispered, his eyes wide with dawning horror. That was me? Aizawa's expression was grim. We've given the transformation a provisional designation, Aegis. And yes, Midoriya. That was you. Your body, forcibly evolved to handle One for All at levels we can't even begin to quantify. Our estimates, based on the seismic readings and property damage, put your power output during that state at over 1,000%. 1,000%. The number was meaningless. It was absurd. He could barely handle 20% without immense concentration. 100% was a bone-shattering, last resort weapon. 1,000, it was the power of a god. Or a demon, Dr. Tanaka continued, her voice devoid of emotion. The transformation is a radical physiological response. Your body prioritizes survival and power management above all else. To handle the immense energy output and the flood of biological information, it appears your higher brain functions are temporarily suppressed. Executive function, complex reasoning, personality, they're all sidelined in favor of the limbic system. Primal instinct. In your case, that instinct appears to be a hyper-aggressive form of protection. It's a trade-off, Aizawa stated bluntly. Your body gets the power it needs to handle Orphe's full might, but the cost is you. The conscious, thinking Izuku Midoriya gets locked away. What's left is a monster driven by a single, simple instinct. A monster. The word hit him like a physical blow. He looked at All Might, his eyes pleading for a different explanation, a comforting lie. But All Might's sorrowful gaze confirmed it. You don't understand. Izuku's voice was barely a whisper. I remember, feeling so angry. It's not anger, my boy, All Might said softly. Dr. Tanaka believes it's a manifestation of your will. Your overwhelming, all-consuming desire to save people. When Aegis is active, that desire is stripped of all nuance and reason. It becomes a simple, brutal equation: identify threat, neutralize threat, protect innocence. Anything and everything can become a perceived threat. The weight of their words settled on him, a crushing, suffocating thing. He had become the very thing he fought against, an uncontrollable force of destruction. A walking natural disaster. He had always feared his power, feared the damage it could do to his own body. He had never once imagined it could be a danger to others. That it could take him over. I need to see it, he said, his voice hardening with a grim resolve. He had to know. He had to see the monster with his own eyes. Aizawa nodded slowly, as if he had expected this. He produced a small, durable tablet from his utility belt and placed it in Izuku's hands. This is compiled from news helicopters and street-level security cameras that survived the blast's EMP. Be warned. It's not easy to watch. With trembling fingers, Izuku pressed play. The video was shaky, the audio distorted by wind and the crackle of raw energy. It showed the crater from above. It showed the creature, him, unfurling to its full, terrifying height. The roar that came from the tablet's speakers was a pale imitation of the one in his memory, but it still made the hairs on his arms stand on end. He watched in silent, sickening horror as the creature, Aegis, launched itself across the crater. He saw it swat the henchman, the man's armored body flying like a discarded toy. He saw it shrug off a full-power AP shot from Bakugo, an attack that could blast through solid steel, as if it were a minor nuisance. Then he saw himself, the monster, swat Bakugo out of the sky. His breath hitched. He saw Kaken, his powerful, proud rival, dismissed with the casual, thoughtless brutality one might use on an insect. He saw the contemptuous lack of regard on Aegis's face. It wasn't hatred. It was worse. It was indifference. The video cut to a different angle, a security camera from a damaged building. The quality was poor, but the scene was brutally clear. He saw his own friends, Uraraka, Ida, Todoroki, standing at the edge of the crater, their faces etched with pure, undiluted terror. They weren't looking at a friend in trouble. They were looking at a threat. They were afraid of him. The final clip was the most damning. The shaky camera zoomed in on the confrontation with all might. He watched as the monster raised its fist to strike down the symbol of peace, his mentor, his father figure. He saw the moment of hesitation, the flicker of confusion. And then he saw All Might, his hero, talking him down not with force, but with gentle words, like calming a wild animal. The video ended with the agonizing, convulsive reversion, his monstrous form collapsing in on itself, steam pouring from his body as he shrank back into a broken boy. Izuku stared at the black screen of the tablet. His reflection was pale, his eyes wide and haunted. He could feel the phantom sensation of that immense power, the memory of that mindless rage. He slowly lowered the tablet and looked at his own hands, turning them over and over. They looked the same as they always had, scarred from 100 battles and 1,000 training sessions. But now, they felt alien. They were the hands of a hero. They were also the hands of a monster. That, he swallowed, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. That's not me. It was a desperate, hollow denial. Your body. Your power. Your will, twisted and amplified. Aizawa's voice was unpitying, forcing him to face the truth. It is you, Midoriya. Whether you like it or not. The question is, what are you going to do about it? A cold, creeping dread began to wrap itself around Izuku's heart. His entire life, his entire journey, had been about controlling his power, learning to channel one for all, to make it his own, to use it precisely and carefully to save people without breaking himself. He had finally reached a point where he could use it without shattering his own bones. He had finally started to feel like a real hero, and now this wasn't a power he could control. It was a chemical reaction. A biological apocalypse that wore his face. It was triggered by his most heroic instinct, the desperate need to protect others when they are in mortal danger. How could he possibly be a hero if his ultimate act of heroism turned him into a mindless engine of destruction? What if next time, All Might wasn't there to talk him down? What if he hurt one of his friends? What if he hurt a civilian? What if he killed someone? The thought was a physical blow, knocking the air from his lungs. He saw it with horrifying clarity, his monstrous green fist descending, not on a villain, but on an innocent person caught in the crossfire. He saw the terror on Uraraka's face, and imagined it being the last thing someone ever saw. He had a rule, a single, inviolable principle that defined his entire being, the core of his heroism: a hero saves people. He had never, ever become a danger to the people he was trying to protect. Until now. He looked up at the four solemn faces watching him, seeing the pity in All Might's eyes, the caution in Aizawa's, the clinical curiosity in Dr. Tanaka's, and the calculating concern in Nizu's. They were all trying to figure out what to do with him. He was no longer just a promising student. He was a problem to be managed. A weapon of mass destruction with a faulty trigger. A quiet, terrifying certainty settled in his soul. "I can't," he whispered, shaking his head slowly. He clutched the simple white blanket of the hospital bed, his knuckles turning white. "I can't use it." All Might's expression softened with pain. "My boy, we will find a way to help you control it." "We will." "No!" Izuku's voice was suddenly sharp, filled with a desperate, self-loathing conviction. He looked at his mentor, his eyes swimming with unshed tears of shame and fear. "You don't understand. Its trigger is my own desire to save people. Its fuel is one for all. The only way to stop it, the only way to make sure that thing never comes out again, is to not use my quirk." He took a deep, shuddering breath, the decision solidifying like ice in his chest. "I can't be a hero if I'm a danger to everyone around me. From now on, I won't use one for all. I can't." He lowered his gaze back to his hands. They were trembling violently. He saw the green lightning of one for all crackle faintly around his fingertips, a subconscious reaction to his distress. He flinched away from it, pulling his hands back as if he'd been burned, suppressing the power with a surge of will. The lightning vanished. The room was silent, save for the steady, mocking beep of the heart monitor, displaying the vital signs of a boy who was physically healthier and stronger than he had ever been, and a hero who had just been utterly and completely broken. The hallways of UA High, usually a boisterous ecosystem of teenage energy, had acquired a new, foreign quiet. It wasn't silence, but a collection of hushed tones, of conversations that died the moment certain footsteps rounded a corner. Whispers followed Izuku Midoriya like a second shadow, clinging to him more tenaciously than his own. The official story, meticulously crafted by Principal Nizu and disseminated to the student body and the public, was a masterpiece of heroic fiction. It spoke of a new villain with a powerful energy-based quirk, a valiant struggle, and the unfortunate destruction of the Kamino industrial complex. It mentioned that several students had been caught in the blast, with Izuku Midoriya sustaining the most serious injuries. His miraculous recovery was attributed to a latent aspect of his quirk activating in response to the trauma. The word monster was never used. The name, Aegis, remained a classified secret, known only to a select few. But you can't erase memory. Every student in Class 1A had been there. They had seen the green light. They had heard the roar that seemed to tear a hole in the sky. They had witnessed the terrifying, hulking creature that had risen from the ashes of their friend. They had seen it swat Bakugo away like a gnat and stand toe-to-toe with All Might. And though they were sworn to secrecy, the truth festered in their sidelong glances and the careful, measured distance they now kept. Izuku felt it like a physical barrier. He was an island in the crowded classroom. He'd been cleared for regular classes after 3 days in the medical bay, a decision he suspected was more about observation than his own well-being. He sat at his desk, head down, furiously scribbling in a fresh notebook. He wasn't analyzing heroes anymore. He was analyzing himself, trying to dissect the horrifying equation of his own biology, writing down every scrap of information Dr. Tanaka had given him, as if he could somehow solve the problem of himself with enough data. One for all remained dormant within him, a sleeping giant he was terrified to wake. He could feel it, that deep, resonant hum of combined power, now interwoven with the alien thrum of gamma energy. It was a constant, low-level vibration in his soul, a reminder of the beast chained in his cells. He actively suppressed it, a constant mental effort that left him perpetually exhausted and on edge. The social fallout was a subtle poison. His friends, his found family, didn't know how to act around him. Ochako Uraraka was the most visibly affected. Her usual bright, bubbly energy was gone, replaced by a constant, hovering anxiety. She would approach him with a hesitant smile, her eyes wide with a worry so profound it made his stomach clench with guilt. "Deku-kun, are you feeling okay today?" she'd ask, her voice a little too soft, her hands twisting together. "You're not pushing yourself too hard, are you?" She was treating him like he was made of glass, like one wrong word might cause him to crack. Or worse, to shatter into something else entirely. He knew she was just trying to be a good friend, but every gentle inquiry felt like she was checking the stability of a bomb. He'd just nod, offer a weak, unconvincing smile, and retreat back into his notebook, unable to bear the fear he saw lurking behind her concern. Tenya Ida, ever the pragmatist, tried to approach the situation with logic and order. He would march up to Izuku's desk, his movements stiff and formal, and speak to him as if he were a delicate piece of machinery that required careful handling. Midoriya-kun, I have observed that you have not been participating in morning stretches with your usual vigor, he'd state, chopping the air with his hand. While I understand you are in a period of recovery, proper physical maintenance is paramount for a hero's readiness. However, you must also be mindful of overexertion. It is a delicate balance. He was trying to connect, to impose a sense of normalcy on a situation that was anything but. Yet, his formality created a chasm between them. He was talking at Izuku, not to him. He was a class president addressing a problematic variable, not a friend talking to a friend in pain. The easy camaraderie they had forged through battles and hardship was gone, replaced by a stilted, awkward caution. The rest of the class was a spectrum of reactions. Tsuyu Ajiri was quiet and observant, her large eyes watching him with an unreadable expression. Kirishima would still greet him with a booming, "Hey, Midoriya," but the casual, manly shoulder slap was now a tentative pat. Mineta actively avoided his side of the room, scurrying away if he got too close. Only Shoto Todoroki treated him with a semblance of normalcy, which in itself was anything but normal. His approach was purely analytical. He cornered Izuku by the lockers after class one day, his heterochromatic eyes intense and focused. "I saw what happened," Todoroki said, his voice a low monotone. "The power output was significant. Greater than my father's. Greater than all mights at Kamino." Izuku flinched, not wanting to talk about it. "Todoroki-kun, is it a secondary quirk?" Todoroki pressed on, his curiosity overriding social grace. "Or a transformation aspect of One for All? Is it triggered by adrenaline? By anger? What are its limits? What are its weaknesses?" He was treating it like a puzzle, a new power to be understood, catalogued, and eventually surpassed. There was no fear in his eyes, only a cold, burning intrigue. In a strange way, it was almost a relief. Todoroki didn't see him as a monster to be feared or a fragile victim to be pitied. He saw him as a power level. A challenge. While it was leagues better than the fear and caution, it was still profoundly isolating. Todoroki wasn't connecting with Izuku, he was studying Aegis. The one person he expected to be his biggest problem was, paradoxically, the one who broke the suffocating tension. It happened during a practical training session. Aizawa, ever the sadist, had them running a grueling obstacle course in Gym Gamma. It was pure physical conditioning, no quirks allowed. This, for Izuku, was both a blessing and a curse. A blessing because it meant he wouldn't be tempted to use One for All. A curse because, without it, he was just a physically fit teenager, and his classmates, even without their quirks, were athletic marvels. He was lagging behind, his body feeling heavy and sluggish from the constant mental strain of suppressing his power. He was hauling himself over a high wall when a hand grabbed the back of his gym uniform and unceremoniously yanked him over the top. He landed in a heap on the other side, looking up to see Katsuki Bakugo standing over him, his crimson eyes narrowed into slits. Bakugo's face was a thundercloud of conflicting emotions. He hadn't spoken a single word to Izuku since the incident. He just watched him, his gaze a constant, burning pressure on the back of Izuku's neck. Now, the silence was finally breaking. "Pathetic," Bakugo snarled, his voice a low, dangerous rasp. Izuku just stared at him, too tired to even be surprised. "Kaken, don't you kaken me, you damn nerd!" Bakugo kicked a loose pebble, sending it skittering across the floor. "So what? You got another freaky power-up? Something that turns you into a giant green rage machine? And this is your brilliant plan? To sit around moping and scribbling in that creepy notebook like a goddamn coward?" The words were sharp, cruel, and exactly what Izuku had come to expect. But the usual triumphant malice in Bakugo's tone was missing. It was replaced by something else, something raw and jagged, frustration. You don't understand, Izuku said, pushing himself to his feet. I can't control it. I hurt people. I could have. I almost hurt you. Hurt me? Bakugo let out a harsh, barking laugh that held no humor. You swatted me like a fly. You think I give a damn about that? You think I'm scared of your little monster mash? He jabbed a finger hard into Izuku's chest, forcing him back a step. What I'm pissed about is you. All this time, all this goddamn power you've been hiding, and the second it gets a little scary, you tuck your tail between your legs and quit. You think being a hero is supposed to be easy? You think it doesn't get scary? His voice was rising, the familiar explosive anger returning, but it was aimed at Izuku's despair, not his power. I saw your face on that monster, you idiot! Bakugo yelled, his voice echoing in the vast gym. I saw it when you were fighting All Might. You were in there. So are you going to sit here and cry about it, or are you going to get off your ass and learn to control the damn thing? Izuku was stunned into silence. He had expected ridicule. He had expected taunts about his villainous new power. He had not expected this. This raw, furious, twisted form of a pep talk. Don't you dare let some monster make you useless, you damn nerd! Bakugo finished, his chest heaving. Because if you do, if you just give up, then you were never worth my time in the first place. With that, he turned and stalked away, leaving Izuku standing alone in the middle of the gym, his ears ringing. Bakugo hadn't tried to comfort him. He hadn't offered a shoulder to cry on. He had challenged him. He had seen the monster, acknowledged its power, and was furious that Izuku was letting it win. In his own brutal, aggressive, and deeply dysfunctional way, Bakugo was telling him not to give up. He wasn't afraid of the monster. He was insulted by Izuku's fear of it. The verbal lashing, as harsh as it was, managed to pierce the thick fog of Izuku's self-pity. For the first time in days, a different thought entered his mind. Not I can't control it, but how do I control it? The answer to that question came in the form of All Might. He found Izuku after school, sitting alone on a bench, staring at the statue of the UA founders. The setting sun cast long shadows, painting the world in hues of orange and purple. Young Bakugo has a unique way with words, doesn't he? All Might said, sitting down beside him. He wasn't in his muscle form, just the skeletal, weary figure of Toshinori Yagi. Izuku managed a weak smile. He's Kaken. He's right, you know, Toshinori said softly. Not about the name-calling, of course, but about the sentiment. Giving up is not in your nature, my boy. It is the one thing you have never done, but this is different. Izuku protested, his voice cracking. This isn't about broken bones. This is about losing myself. What if I can't control it? What if I become a bigger threat than any villain I could ever fight? Toshinori was silent for a long moment, his gaze distant. When I first received One for All, I too felt like I was housing a stranger inside me, an immense power with a will of its own, a legacy of 8 other souls. At first, I tried to dominate it, to force it to bend to my will. It was a disaster. I was a clumsy, inefficient hero. It was only when I listened to my master, Nana Shimura, that I began to understand. He turned to look at Izuku, his blue eyes clear and serious. She told me, you cannot command a storm, Toshinori. You must learn to become the eye of it. This new power, this aegis. It is a part of you now. You cannot suppress it. You cannot cage it. That will only make it more volatile when it finally breaks free. You must integrate it. You must learn to be its heart, its conscience. How? The question was a desperate whisper. By starting small, Toshinori said, a glimmer of his old, inspiring smile returning. He stood up. Come with me. There's something you need to see. He led Izuku not to a familiar training ground, but deep beneath the school, to a sublevel Izuku never knew existed. They entered a massive, reinforced chamber. The walls were thick, layered with lead, titanium, and some kind of black, energy-absorbing polymer. The entire room was a sealed cube, an observation deck protected by a transparent shield that looked to be several feet thick. It was stark, empty, and intimidating. Power Loader and Cementhouse worked overtime on this. Toshinori explained. We're calling it the Gamma Cage. It's designed to withstand, well, you. It's completely isolated, shielded, and monitored. Nothing gets in or out without our say-so. Principal Nizu and Dr. Tanaka were in the observation room, their faces illuminated by the glow of a dozen monitors displaying Izuku's real-time biometrics. The goal today is simple, Midoriya-kun. Dr. Tanaka's voice came over an intercom, crisp and clinical. We are not trying to trigger a full transformation. That would be reckless. We are trying to understand the trigger itself. Izuku stood in the center of the vast, empty room, feeling small and exposed. Our working theory, she continued, is that the transformation is not caused by anger, as is common in fictional portrayals of such abilities. It is a response to extreme duress, specifically a spike in adrenaline and cortisol tied to a desperate, life-or-death desire to protect others. Today, we will attempt to simulate that stimulus in a controlled environment and monitor your biological response. We want to see if you can touch the edge of the transformation without falling in. Izuku's heart began to pound. This was it. He had to face the monster. On a massive screen at the far end of the room, a video began to play. It was a simulation, but a terrifyingly realistic one. It showed a building collapsing, with a group of screaming children trapped beneath the falling rubble. The audio was hyper-realistic, the cries of terror designed to provoke an emotional, instinctual response. He felt it immediately. A jolt of pure, undiluted panic. His hero instincts screamed at him. Save them. Move. Do something. His heart rate skyrocketed. The monitors in the observation room blared with alarms. He felt a familiar heat begin to build in his core, the deep, resonant hum of the gamma-fused OFA growing louder, vibrating through his entire body. His skin began to tingle. No, stop, he thought, clenching his fists, his knuckles white. He squeezed his eyes shut, trying to fight the rising tide. It's not real. It's a simulation. They're not real. Midoriya, your gamma radiation levels are spiking. Dr. Tanaka's voice was sharp. Your cellular activity is increasing exponentially. You're approaching the threshold. He could feel it, the agonizing pull of the transformation. The phantom sensation of his bones beginning to stretch, his muscles beginning to swell. The roar was a whisper at the back of his mind, promising unlimited power at the cost of his soul. No! I won't let you! He thought of Bakugo's furious challenge. He thought of All Might's calm words, become the eye of the storm. He couldn't fight it head-on. That was a losing battle. He had to redirect it. He had to give the power somewhere else to go. Instead of suppressing the surge, he tried to channel it. He focused all his energy, all his will, on his right arm. He pictured the rushing river of power inside him and imagined building a dam, opening a single, small floodgate, and directing the torrent down one specific path. He let out a strained yell, a sound of immense effort. He drew his right arm back, pulling not just on the familiar energy of One for All, but on the deeper, wilder power of the gamma energy that was trying to consume him. Let's see, he grunted, his teeth gritted. Take this! He thrust his fist forward, not aiming for a full power smash, but a controlled release. For a breathtaking instant, his entire arm changed. The skin took on a faint, translucent green tint, and beneath it, his veins glowed with the toxic light of the gamma core. The green lightning of OFA that wreathed his arm was thicker, more potent, crackling with an audible, hungry power. He punched the empty air. The result was astonishing. A blast of pure kinetic force erupted from his fist, not the cone of a Delaware smash, but a focused, coherent beam of pressure. It shot across the room and slammed into the far wall. The energy-absorbent polymer sizzled and smoked, and the titanium plate beneath it buckled, a massive, fist-shaped indentation appearing in the reinforced wall. The rebound shockwave threw him off his feet. He landed on his back, gasping for breath, his entire body trembling with exertion. The transformation had receded. The roar in his head was silent. He looked at his right arm. It was aching, humming with residual energy, but it wasn't broken. It wasn't even bruised. In the observation room, the alarms fell silent. Everyone stared at the monitors, then at the massive dent in the wall, and then at the boy panting on the floor. Did you see that? Dr. Tanaka whispered, her clinical composure momentarily shattered by pure scientific awe. His power output for that single strike was consistent with a 100% smash, but his biometrics show the strain on his arm was equivalent to maybe 45%. The gamma energy acted as a biological reinforcement, a structural buffer. All Might pressed his hand against the shielded glass, a huge, brilliant smile finally breaking through the worry on his face. He didn't suppress it, he said, his voice filled with pride. He controlled it. Lying on the cold floor of the gamma cage, Izuku stared at his trembling hand. A single, triumphant thought cut through his exhaustion and fear. It's not just a monster. It's power. He had felt it. For one brief, shining moment, he hadn't been fighting a monster inside him. He had been wielding it. It was the first glimmer of hope he'd had since waking up in the medical bay. The path forward was not one of suppression or fear. It was a path of integration, of control. He had to tame the beast, not by caging it, but by giving it a leash. And he had just forged the very first link. The shadows of Muzurifu had a new occupant. Dr. Eris Thorne was a ghost in his own city, a phantom haunting the fringes of the society he so vehemently despised. He had traded his pristine laboratory for a series of derelict warehouses and forgotten subway tunnels, a network of squalor that afforded him the one thing he now valued above all else: anonymity. He had, by all logical accounts, failed. His grand unveiling, the demonstration that was meant to usher in a new era of engineered power, had ended in a catastrophic, premature detonation. His prototype gamma emitter was vaporized. His financial backers had vanished into the ether, their encrypted lines of communication going dead one by one. His hand-picked team of loyal, armored acolytes was either dead, incarcerated, or had wisely scattered to the four winds. He was a general with no army, a scientist with no lab. And yet, as he sat before a flickering bank of stolen monitors in the damp, subterranean chill, Eris Thorne had never felt more triumphant. He replayed the footage for the 100th time. It was a chaotic mess, compiled from a dozen different sources. A traffic cam that had momentarily survived the EMP, a high-altitude weather drone, a snippet from a civilian's dropped phone. But through the static and the fractured frames, the truth was undeniable: the green light, the concussive roar, and the creature that had risen from the epicenter. A slow, predatory smile stretched across Thorne's gaunt face. "Magnificent," he whispered, his voice a dry rustle in the underground silence. His theory had not just been proven correct, it had been validated on a scale that exceeded his wildest projections. He had hypothesized that gamma radiation, when properly calibrated, could act as the ultimate catalyst, a key to unlock the human genome's latent potential and overwrite the chaotic mess of quirks. He had intended to create stable, controllable soldiers. What he had created instead, through sheer, beautiful accident, was a god. Subject 0. He murmured, typing the designation into a fresh data file. He zoomed in on a blurry image of the green behemoth swatting a UA student from the sky. The raw, untamed power was breathtaking. It was everything he had ever dreamed of, made manifest in a single, perfect specimen. The boy, the media had identified him as Izuku Midoriya, had not just survived the radiation. He had metabolized it. He had bonded with it. He had become its living vessel. The official news reports were a laughable farce. Unexplained seismic activity. A villain with a powerful energy quirk. They were scrambling to cover it up, to hide the existence of his creation from a world that wasn't ready for it. They were treating it like a problem, a disaster to be contained. Fools. They saw a monster. He saw a messiah, his creation, his property. The thought solidified in his mind, hardening from a scientific curiosity into an obsessive, proprietary conviction. That boy was the living proof of his genius. He was the key to reclaiming his reputation, to silencing his critics, to building the new world order he envisioned. He had to get him back. For weeks, Thorne lived in the digital ether. He hacked into city infrastructure grids, monitored police and hero comms, and pieced together a mosaic of information. He learned of the whispers at UA, the sudden and extreme secrecy surrounding Midoriya. He noted the construction of a new, heavily shielded subterranean level beneath the school, the Gamma Cage, as his stolen schematics called it. They were studying him. Trying to understand him. Trying to tame him. A surge of indignant fury coursed through him. How dare they? How dare they treat his masterpiece like a lab rat? They, with their outdated notions of heroism and their chaotic, unpredictable quirks, had no right to lay a hand on the future. He needed a plan. A direct assault on Yue was suicide. The school was a fortress, and his creation was at its heart. He couldn't fight it, not yet. Brute force was the tool of the simple-minded heroes he so despised. He was a man of science, of intellect. The solution was not to overpower the beast, but to outthink the boy. He needed leverage. He needed a scenario so perfectly engineered, so overwhelmingly stressful, that it would force the boy's hand. He needed to create a crisis that only a monster could solve. He needed to bait the trap. His fingers flew across a keyboard, lines of code scrolling across the screen. He wasn't just a geneticist. He was a master of robotics and AI, disciplines he had pursued to create the perfect, controllable soldiers that quirks could never be. Before his disgrace, he had designed a series of advanced security drones for a major corporation. The project was scrapped, but the prototypes, and more importantly, their override command codes still existed. It was a simple matter to reactivate them, to repurpose them. He would give them new armor plating, salvaged from his former henchmen's suits. He would power their core systems with a more stable, refined version of his gamma research, granting them enhanced strength and durability. They would be his new army. An army of near-indestructible machines. The plan formed, elegant and cruel in its simplicity. He wouldn't attack a military base or a hero agency. That would be too predictable. He would attack the heart of the city. He would attack the innocent. He would create a scenario that played directly to the boy's well-documented, almost pathological, heroism. He set his sights on the Kiyoshi Ward shopping mall, a sprawling, multi-level monument to consumerism that was always packed on a Saturday afternoon. It was the perfect stage. Let the hunt begin. Thorne whispered to the flickering screens, his reflection a pale, hungry ghost in the glass. The Saturday afternoon air was filled with the cheerful cacophony of civilian life. The chatter of shoppers, the laughter of children, the tinny pop music drifting from storefronts. It was a symphony of normalcy that felt a world away from the grim silence of the gamma cage. For Izuku Midoriya, it was both a balm and a source of profound anxiety. He sat at a small table in the mall's bustling food court, a half-eaten katsudon growing cold in front of him. He was supposed to be enjoying a rare day off with Uraraka, Ida, and Todoroki, an attempt by his friends to drag him back into the land of the living. But he couldn't relax. Every loud noise, every sudden movement at the edge of his vision, made his heart skip a beat. He was constantly, subconsciously monitoring his own adrenaline levels, terrified of the spike that could herald the monster's return. The sessions in the gamma cage had been both promising and terrifying. He was getting better at channeling the gamma-infused power into his limbs, achieving incredible feats of strength without breaking his bones. He had managed a controlled, 60% smash that had the force of a 150% blow, leaving a clean, fist-shaped hole through a 5-foot block of reinforced concrete. But it was a knife's edge. Every time he tapped into that power, he could feel the pull of the transformation, a seductive whisper of rage and strength at the back of his mind. He was learning to wield the beast's power, but the beast itself was always there, waiting. He hadn't transformed again, but the fear of it was a constant companion. Midoriya, are you all right? Uraraka's voice pulled him from his thoughts. She looked at his untouched food, her brow furrowed with concern. You've barely eaten anything. I'm fine, he lied, forcing a smile. Just thinking. Indeed, one must always be thinking, Ida declared, making a sharp, chopping motion with his hand. However, a designated relaxation period is also a crucial component of a hero's regimen. It allows for mental and physical recuperation. You must endeavor to relax more efficiently. Todoroki simply slurped his cold soba, his gaze distant. The crowds are a potential tactical nightmare, he observed flatly. Poor lines of sight. Multiple choke points, high risk of civilian casualties in the event of a villain attack. Izuku winced. Todoroki wasn't wrong, but his blunt assessment did nothing to soothe Izuku's frayed nerves. He felt exposed, vulnerable. His quirk, once his greatest asset, now felt like a liability, a doomsday weapon he was carrying in a crowded room. That was when the lights went out. One moment, the food court was bathed in the bright, artificial glow of the mall. The next, it was plunged into near-total darkness, save for the emergency lights that cast long, ominous shadows. The cheerful chatter died instantly, replaced by a wave of confused murmurs, which quickly escalated into panicked shouts. "What's going on?" Uraraka asked, her hand instinctively going to her belt pouch where she kept her costume request beacon. Before anyone could answer, a sound cut through the chaos. It was a heavy, rhythmic thump, 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 like a giant, metallic heartbeat. It grew louder, closer. Then came the shattering of glass as the main atrium skylight, 5 stories up, exploded inwards. 4 figures descended from the shattered skylight, landing in the center of the food court with ground-shaking impacts that cracked the tiled floor. They were not human. They were sleek, humanoid robots, each easily 7 feet tall. Their chassis were made of a dull, black metal that seemed to absorb the light, and their single, glowing red optic sensors swept across the terrified crowd. They moved with a chilling, inhuman grace, each one armed with a heavy-caliber cannon integrated into its right arm. Panic erupted. The crowd became a stampede, a screaming, shoving mass of bodies rushing for the exits. "Everyone, stay calm and evacuate in an orderly fashion!" Ida yelled, his hero instincts taking over as he began directing the flow of people. But the robots had other plans. They raised their arms, not to fire, but to project a shimmering, red energy field that blocked the main exits, herding the terrified shoppers back into the central atrium. A 5th robot, larger than the others and adorned with gold trim, descended into the center of the atrium. Its optic sensor glowed brighter than the rest. A synthesized, emotionless voice boomed through the mall's PA system, which crackled back to life. "Attention, citizens of Muzudafu. You are now the honored guests of Dr. Eris Thorne. Please remain calm. Your cooperation ensures your safety. Any attempt to resist or escape will be met with decisive force." The name hit Izuka like a physical blow. Thorne. The man who had done this to him. This was his doing. "He's creating a hostage situation," Todoroki stated, his voice dangerously calm as he rose to his feet. "They're trying to draw out the heroes. We are heroes," Uraraka said, her expression hardening with resolve. "We have to do something." Izuka's mind was racing, but his body was frozen. His heart was hammering against his ribs, not from fear for himself, but for the hundreds of innocent people trapped in the mall. He could feel it, the familiar, dreaded spike of adrenaline. The hum of the gamma energy inside him grew louder, a dangerous, predatory purr. No. Not here. Not now. He had to get the civilians out. That was the priority. "Okay," he said, his voice tight and strained. "Here's the plan. Ida, you're the fastest. Find a secondary exit, a service entrance, anything. Get as many people out as you can. Uraraka, you provide cover and rescue. Use your quirk to lift debris, clear paths, and get anyone who is trapped or injured to Ida. Todoroki, you and I will run interference. We need to distract them, draw their fire away from the civilians." It was a sound, logical plan. The kind of plan Deku, the strategist, always made. "Let's do it," Ida said, his engines already flaring to life as he vanished into the panicked crowd. Todoroki didn't need to be told twice. He slammed his right foot down, and a massive wave of ice erupted from the floor, racing towards the 4 perimeter robots. The robots, with their inhuman reflexes, simply sidestepped the attack, the ice wall crashing harmlessly against the energy barrier. "Their armor is too thick, and they're too fast," Todoroki gritted out, switching tactics and unleashing a torrent of fire from his left side. The flames washed over one of the robots, but the machine stood its ground, its black chassis glowing red-hot but remaining structurally intact. "The metal is designed to absorb and disperse energy," Izuka realized, his analytical mind kicking in despite the rising panic. "Brute force won't work." Uraraka was already in motion, tapping fallen kiosks and debris, clearing a path for a group of terrified shoppers towards a service corridor Ida had kicked open. One of the robots turned its attention to her, its cannon arm beginning to glow. "I got it!" Izuka yelled, his body finally moving. He activated One for All, but consciously, deliberately capped it at 8%. The familiar green lightning crackled around him, but it felt thin, weak, like a pale imitation of the power he was holding back. He launched himself at the robot, his iron-soled boots clanging against the floor. He leaped into the air, cocking his leg back for a shoot-style kick. He slammed his foot into the robot's head, putting all the force of his 8% into the blow. The impact was like kicking a solid steel wall. A dull clang echoed through the atrium, and a jolt of pain shot up Izuku's leg. The robot's head snapped to the side, but it immediately corrected, its red optic locking onto him. It hadn't even been staggered. Izuku landed, his leg aching, his heart sinking. At 8%, he was useless. He was outmatched. He needed more power. But more power meant getting closer to the edge, closer to the monster. He could feel it stirring, a deep, guttural growl in the back of his mind. The sight of his friends in danger, of civilians screaming, was the exact stimulus he had been dreading. The gamma hum intensified, and for a second, he thought he saw his own veins glow faintly green through his skin. He grit his teeth and pushed his power up. 15%! He was faster now, more agile. He dodged a plasma blast from the robot, the shot melting a hole in the floor where he'd been standing. He moved in close, delivering a flurry of 15% punches to the robot's torso, trying to find a weak point, a joint, a seam in the armor. But it was like punching a mountain. His fists, which could shatter concrete, barely left a scratch on the black metal. Across the atrium, Todoroki was faring no better. His flames and ice were powerful, but the robots were too durable and their coordinated attacks forced him onto the defensive. A plasma blast clipped his side, burning through his jacket and forcing a pained grunt from him. Izuku saw it happen, and his focus broke for a split second. It was all the robot needed. It brought its cannon arm around in a sweeping blow, catching Izuku in the chest and sending him flying. He crashed through the front of a clothing store, his body slamming into a rack of mannequins. He lay there, groaning, the air knocked from his lungs. His ribs screamed in protest. He was ineffective. His friends were getting overwhelmed. The civilians were still in danger. Every second he held back, every moment he fought cautiously, was a moment someone else could get hurt. The internal pressure was becoming unbearable. It felt like a physical weight in his chest, a dam about to burst. The beast was rattling its cage, roaring to be let out, promising him the power to end this, the strength to save everyone. All he had to do was let go. He pushed himself up, his body aching. Through the shattered storefront, he could see the battlefield. Ida was a blur of motion, but he couldn't be everywhere at once. Uraraka was trying to float a family with a small child up to the second-floor balcony, away from the chaos. The lead robot, the gold-trimmed one that had been observing from the center, finally moved. It raised its cannon arm, not at Todoroki, not at Izuku, but at Uraraka and the family she was trying to save. A high-pitched whine filled the air as its weapon charged, a bright red light building at the muzzle. Time seemed to slow down. Izuku saw the terror on Uraraka's face as she realized she was the target. He saw the little girl in her mother's arms, her eyes wide and uncomprehending. He saw the glowing red light of the cannon, a star of death about to bloom. There was no time for a plan. No time for 15% or 20%. No time for half measures. They were going to die. His friend was going to die. That family was going to die. All because he was afraid. Afraid of himself. In that moment, a new thought, clear and sharp as a shard of glass, cut through his fear. What good is being a hero if you let people die because you're scared to use your power? The dam broke. He didn't fight it anymore. He didn't try to suppress it or channel it. He opened the floodgates. He let the monster out. A guttural scream tore from his throat, a sound that was not entirely his own. He roared, his voice deepening, distorting. Will, the gamma energy, finally unleashed, surged through him in a tidal wave. The pain was excruciating, 1,000 times worse than the first time because he was conscious for every agonizing second of it. He felt his bones break and reform, his muscles shred and expand. Green steam erupted from his body, and the familiar, terrifying transformation took hold. Save you! The roar was completed by a different voice, a bass thunder that shook the entire mall to its foundations. Where the boy had stood, the 8-foot green behemoth now rose, its eyes blazing with toxic green light, the chaotic storm of one for all lightning crackling around it. Aegis had returned.